Hello, everyone. I'm Mabel Chan. Welcome to my podcast, One in a Billion. Today, we continue our fall season, Find Your Roots special series with a spotlight on Asians in New York. Find Your Roots is about Asian American mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, looking back at the roots of their family history, cultural identity, and personal journey, one person at a time.
My name is Angela Lee. 我的名字是李子婷。我的名字是李子婷。
Angela is Chinese American with parents from Fuzhou, China. She graduated from Columbia University Graduate School with a master's degree in American Studies last summer. Her undergraduate degree was in Asian American Studies at UCLA. Angela is quite young, 24 years old, but
I have an old soul, a millennium soul.
Angela was born in New York City, Chinatown, but she called herself a satellite baby.
I was just a couple months old, and my mom took me on a plane and sent me back to China, back to my parents' native homeland to be raised by extended family.
In today's episode, Angela recalls her childhood moments surrounded by a village of elders. They helped raise her until she was 5 years old. Even after she returned to New York City, her memory of her extended family in Fujian remains fresh. Most recently, Angela wanted to dig deeper into her parents' immigration history. So she began an oral history project interviewing her parents who speak Fujianese with a little English. Angela is eager to trace her roots to better understand her family and to heal herself. Here's our conversation. You were born in New York City. So how old were you when you were sent back to China to be raised by your grandparents? Tell me how it happened and why.
I was maybe 3 or 4 months old, and my mom took me on a plane and sent me back to China because at that time, my parents were living in a crowded Chinatown apartment with like another family. So in their mind, it was like no way to raise a child. My parents wanted to create a stable environment for me to live and grow up in. And so they decided to send me back to my grandparents and take care of me. It was also an opportunity for me to connect with my grandparents while my parents stayed in the US and worked.
I see. So those years would have been...
So I was born in 1999. So it was from 1999 to around like 2004.
Okay. Were you able to stay in touch with your parents for those 5 years? And how?
Mostly through phone calls. I remember my grandparents calling my dad once a week or once every 2 weeks. And I would always be tasked with asking my parents to send home more money back to China so that I could get more food or clothes.
Do you remember what you said in Chinese?
Yeah, I would say it in Mandarin, and it would be like, 爸爸妈妈可不可以送给我多点钱，给奶奶公公多点钱。
Thanks for sharing that. That's very interesting. Do you have any memories at all during those 5 years in Fujian?
A little bit. I was with my grandparents on my paternal side. They came from a very rural farming village. And so I remember a lot of chickens, a lot of like rice farms, my grandpa working on the rice farm, and feelings of being really hot and sticky all the time because it was like really humid where we came from. One particular memory that I have, one night my grandpa was supposed to be watching me, but he went out to a local opera. When he came back home, my grandma was really mad at him for leaving me at home by myself.
Do you have any memory, for example, what you ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, where you went to school, your buddies, or your friends?
Some popular Fujianese dishes are peanut noodles, and in Fujianese it's called buan mian. And it's just a mix of like peanut butter, soy sauce, and sesame oil. Some really popular breakfast staples for me still to this day are like fried taro. It's really delicious fried dough with like cabbage and peanuts inside. And I think I would always eat that with soy milk.
Wow, every morning.
And I still crave that to this day. Some of my favorite foods are also like street foods. Every time I'm missing a bit of home, China, Fuzhou, New York, I would always try to get like skewers from the carts.
So you were speaking mostly in Mandarin Chinese and Fujianese to your grandparents and your friends and neighbors, right?
Yes, so no English at all, just Mandarin Fujianese.
What were you told about going to America at what age? Tell me how it happened and why.
It was less of what I was told, but more of my grandparents letting me know that I had parents elsewhere. I wish I was like able to like keep a journal or a diary at that age. So I feel like a lot of that has been lost at me. I was trying to prepare myself to recognize voice with face and have that upcoming reunion with my parents.
So how did it happen?
A relative in Fuzhou was going to go to America. She was my guardian who like took me on this plane ride from Fuzhou to JFK airport. And I remember being really, really motion sick during the plane ride because I've never been on a plane, train, or car because I grew up on the farm, right? I remember just like puking everywhere and like the flight attendants giving me like so many different bags so that I could like relieve myself.
Wow.
I was worried that I would mess up my dress because I was going to meet my parents for the first time. I was like, I think wearing my like best or the prettiest outfit I had.
Wow.
I'm tearing up a little bit because at the airport terminal, I saw my parents for the first time. And I knew they were my parents because they were jumping up and down and waving at me. So in that instance, I knew it was them.
How hard was the adjustment in the first year or two? And what makes it hard?
Of course, like the adjustments was very hard. For some reason, I did not get along with my mom. She just appeared to be very strict. My dad would always walk me to school and picking me up from after school. We always went to the park or got ice cream or bubble tea. So I felt a lot of affection versus my mom. She was always worried about how well I was doing in school. And I found a lot of her nagging really unfounded and really troublesome because I couldn't keep up in school because I just didn't know English. Now, as an adult, I can definitely see that coming from a place of care and love. But I remember always arguing with my mom, and it was to the point where, like, I would rather have my dad do my hair.
That's funny.
Yeah, I wouldn't let my mom touch my hair at all. My mom wanted to do all these like hairstyles for me, but no, I like made my dad like learn how to use a comb and do my hairstyles.
Now, why were you arguing so much with your mom? And why was your mom dolling you up? Was that her work? Did she work in a hair salon?
She worked at a garment factory. So I think the dressing me up was her form of spoiling me and showing care and love, an extension of her affection, right? Because I think her growing up, she didn't get to wear pretty clothes. And the transition was also difficult when I had to attend kindergarten for the first time because I didn't speak any English. I felt really lost and confused both at home and at school. I spent a lot of my time by myself at home because my parents had to work all the time. And on the weekends, I was always home alone. My dad and mom would either sometimes take me to work with them. Like I would sit in the factories while they worked. In the case of my mom, my dad was working at a restaurant at the time. But then later on, I was just by myself watching like American TV shows on the weekends.
And how long did that last in terms of going to your parents' workplaces, right? So you could be with them, but then you would be sitting alone.
Just a year. By the time I was in first or second grade, I was staying at home by myself and playing with my neighbors a lot and their kids.
Gotcha. You said you love visiting Chinatown because it felt like home. How is that? Tell me more.
Every time I visit Chinatown, I always think about food. So there was a lot of dim sum relatives and family. These are my parents' friends from the factory or from the restaurant. And I just always felt very loved by them. There was like a sense of community. At my dad's restaurant during lunchtime, everyone would come together and we would sit around and share food. I was like always surrounded by people. And that was such a big contrast to when I was like home alone and watching TV, waiting for my parents to come home from work.
When you were growing up in Queens, did you have any flashbacks that took you back to your roots in Fujian? Any triggers like sight, sound, smell, scenes of people playing mahjong or speaking in Fujianese?
The one thing that I always think about how I took for granted like my phone calls with my grandparents when I was in the US. My grandma and grandpa were calling me every 2 weeks. And I would just always say hi. I wasn't able to see my grandma before she passed. And so I think a lot about relationships and how much that's shifted when I came to the US. It felt like I closed the door on my childhood the moment I entered the US. And it's something that I'm only reconciling with now as an adult.
I know you began to interview your mom and dad earlier this year. Why? Tell me more about that.
In January 2023, so I conducted my first oral history with my mom. And it was initially just supposed to be like a casual conversation. And I started like right after dinner over some tea and like melon seeds. And I was inspired because when I graduated UCLA in 2021, I was feeling a little bit regretful that I didn't get to dive deeper into my own immigration story and also experiences of growing up as Fujianese American in New York City. Oral histories are hard, but also like incredibly rewarding because you don't know what will come up and you don't even know how to react. So my mom started like tearing up from one of the first questions I asked her. What were the last words you said to your mom before you left for America? It was the first time she's ever been given a space to reflect and share her feelings about her childhood, leaving China, about her family, homeland, and trauma. And it was also for the first time that I saw my mom as a human being. And I was also realizing that I am this year the same age that she was when she first came to America. I'm slowly beginning to understand how her experiences and trauma have shaped her and my dad into the people they are today. And part of that is also an understanding of the choices they made as parents to provide a better life for me and my siblings.
Wow. It's very touching what you just said. It's a very important first step that you have taken. I am curious now, why did your mom and dad come to America and what year?
They came in the early 90s. At that point, everyone from their village was coming to America. Mostly older folks already had families and were settled down. The idea was if you wanted to make money, make something of yourself, you had to leave. My mom's family was immensely poor. She's the youngest of 7 kids, only able-bodied and willing to like come to America to work. And she wanted to provide a better life for my grandma and her mom. For my dad, it was similar boat. He wanted to like create something and provide a better life for his parents as well. So he already had relatives that were in the US. So it was just a matter of following his relatives in their footsteps.
If I were to ask you to describe their dream, their drive, and desire, how would you put it?
My parents' hopes and dreams have been put into me and my siblings. My mom often says that me and my siblings are her biggest pride and joy. And I can now fully understand the depth of what she means.
Wow. So this is the first time I've heard about siblings. How many siblings do you have?
I am the eldest. I have a younger brother and younger sister. They're twins, both 18 right now and in their first year of college.
How would you describe your own dream, drive, and desire?
My biggest dream or desire is to live for myself while also uplifting my family and community. And I do want to emphasize the live for myself aspect because, as like a dajie, like there are sacrifices I've made to raise my siblings and also help my parents because there's non-English speaking immigrant folks. So I want to reach a point where I'm comfortably living for myself while still being cognizant of my roots and where I come from.
Excellent. That's so well said, Angela. You have identified as Chinese American from Fuzhou, and you have said this: Fuzhounese Chinese Asian American identity was always salient. You wanted to be able to articulate an understanding of the Chinese American community outside of the model minority myth. So, my question is, what is your narrative, and how does that contradict the model minority myth?
A large part of this started in high school for me. I went to a pretty affluent high school. And so, being one of the few Asian American kids in school, I was also reconciling with class. Small things like in government class, we're being asked what our opinions about abortion, immigration, about current events that I had absolutely no idea about because one, I didn't have a computer at home at the time. Two, like my dinner table conversations are mostly like silent, right? It's just like scraping of chopsticks. Whereas a lot of my classmates and peers, like their parents were lawyers, doctors, journalists that really actively stimulated these conversations. So for me in high school, I felt like I wasn't seen or I didn't have a space to be able to talk. And it's that feeling where you're muted in a conversation. You want to say something, but you don't know what it is to say. A critical moment for me was my English class. We read Joy Luck Club for the first time. Our English teacher turned to the Asian side of the room and asked the students what they felt. And it was one of the first moments where I could say something that was authentic to me.
What did you say? Do you remember?
I am pretty sure something along the lines with like being able to resonate with the characters about how protective June's mother is or how superstitious some of the other mothers are, because my mom is exactly just like that. Waverly struggle with her mom's expectations for her, I can really relate to.
When you say you want to articulate an understanding of the Chinese American community outside of the model minority myth, what part of that model minority myth doesn't cover your story? I mean, you do very well. You're at Columbia. You went to Hunter High School in New York City, correct?
Yeah.
So your grades are good, right? So you're a model minority in that you really do very well in school and you're trying to succeed in life. So that to me fits well. How is that outside of that myth? Help me understand.
The myth also articulates that all Asian Americans are able to succeed because they have the resources needed to succeed and that they are able to get really well paying jobs in like different fields. My parents, we struggled with food security, housing security. It makes the assumption that kids like me are able to succeed because we have the resources. But in many instances of my peers, like we didn't have the resources. The fact that I was alone on the weekends by myself with no childcare is not a picture that everyone knows about. I'm a Chinese American family. My mom still works in the garment factory. She is doing physical labor to make ends meet for her children.
Up until this day.
Even till this day.
And your dad is still in a restaurant.
Yes. The minority myth perpetuates an image that all of us are doing well and all of us are well educated when that's not the case. My dad has only a middle school education background. My mom barely graduated high school. A lot of resources that I also lacked growing up as a kid and having to be the caretaker of my siblings because we couldn't afford a nanny.
Thank you for that, Angela, because that's very helpful for me to understand what that means, and your goal to present your own story is clear now to me. Now, I came to know you, Angela, through a national organization called Fuzhou America, through a co-founder, Alan Chow. He says something that is very striking to me. He said he didn't want to wait 20 years later to find his roots or to honor his parents and grandparents who paved the way for his well-being and a better life today. Is that why you start now to find your roots and honor your parents?
I first came across Fuzhou America when I was like looking for people to interview for my thesis about Fujianese American kinship networks and economies in New York. So part of the search is about finding my roots and really connecting with my parents and archiving and taking down the important histories and stories that they have and make it be known that their stories are valuable. It feels really great to feel accepted by the folks because we share similar upbringings and stories. And so there's very little explaining that I need to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. Now, what part of your parents' story is most valuable to you? Why?
The humorous parts, my parents' love story. So I found out that my dad, when he was trying to pursue my mom, he used to call my mom's factory every single day at like 12 o'clock during lunchtime to talk with her for 5 minutes or less. And he did that for 6 months before they eventually got married. Humor is a really important tool to help unpack trauma and to digest the more traumatic moments of their story. So in the middle of like my mom telling me about her journey to America, she would inject very humorous moments. Like on trash day in New York, like I would see like so many people bring out piles of trash, and I thought it was like free stuff that she could just like rummage through, until later she learned that it was actually trash.
I see. Wow. That's really endearing. What other troubling or traumatic aspects of their story that you remember most?
Because they were smuggled into America, my parents were like detained in Angel Island for a little bit and then later sent to New York. And the first thing that my mom did when she got into New York, they both went straight to work. So much of their early youth has been just working, waking up and work. And I think that's why my parents, my mom especially, is like really strict about money, is because she knows what it's like to have nothing.
Wow, but she had friends who would tell her where the jobs are, right?
Yeah. So that's why I think kinship networks in these communities of immigrants with nothing when they come to America are so important to their survival.
Angela, what is your plan now to dig deeper into your roots? Are you thinking about traveling back to Fujian or more interviews?
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot of nostalgia recently. New York's always been home and it's always felt like home. But part of me really wants to go back to Fuzhou. My parents have bought a house in Fuzhou and it's been renovated and furnished, but no one's living there. And so I'm like kind of itching to do a trip, hopefully with with my mom at least.
Let's switch gear a little bit. What are Fujianese people known for in China?
The overarching word I would use is entrepreneurship. A lot of them end up being restaurant workers. Some of them start their own construction companies, nail salon owners, mahjong parlors. A couple of my non-blood related uncles like owning mahjong parlors. They have their own little underground banks that they create to help themselves in their like kinship networks. We're very known for our seafood because of how close we are to the ports. Yeah, I think entrepreneurship and business.
Is that you? Does that describe you, Angela?
I think I'm a little bit of an anomaly by my trajectory of doing policy work and engaging in arts and culture. I am a civic engagement coordinator for a nonprofit based in Chinatown and the Lower East Side. And I'm also a part-time master's student at Columbia. Prior to that, I received my undergrad in Asian American Studies and Political Science at UCLA.
What do you care most about?
Yeah, so I oversee our civic engagement and immigrant social services nonprofit that provides like direct services to immigrant families in Chinatown, Lower East Side. I also spearhead a prevention coalition which aims to tackle drug and substance misuse amongst Asian immigrant youth populations. So I have a lot of flexibility and space to take on community outreach initiatives that I think are important. And more recently, I've been advocating for the passage of the Asian American Studies Bill, which would require all K-12 public schools in New York State to integrate Asian American studies material into their social studies curricula. Like I mentioned before about my experience reading like Joy Luck Club, being able to like see myself and our stories reflected in curriculum was so powerful for me and my journey. And I want all kids to be able to experience that on some level. So I'm really excited to be doing that work. And education is something that I'm particularly passionate about.
Sounds great, Angela. There's something you said earlier which hangs on my head a little bit. You said you felt a little bit regretful that you didn't dive deeper into your immigration story, growing up Chinese or Fuzhou American in New York when you were a student at UCLA in LA. What triggered that kind of regret? Your parents are still alive, weren't they? So what's the hurry?
Yeah, maybe because for my graduation, I was one of the graduation speakers. And so my family flew out to California to watch me speak. And I'm delivering this speech in English. And I'm talking about all the cool things that the school has done and that our community has done together. And on that stage, I see my parents and they probably don't know a single word what I'm saying. And so in that moment, I was realizing I've been spending the 4 years doing this amazing research on other communities when there's so much work that I need to do right at home with my family that I haven't done yet. That's where the regret comes from. I went to school across the country. That physical distance, emotional distance made me realize that how much more capacity I have to do my own work with my family.
Wow, Angela, what you're saying also brought tears to my eyes because you're so mature. And for your parents to fly out there to listen to you, even though they might not understand a word of English, is also incredible. They don't need to understand the words. They just feel the pride that you bring by being so successful. So thank you for that. I have not met them, but I'm sure they're incredibly proud of you.
Thank you so much for your kind words.
You also said that you wanted to write down the inner monologues and questions you had in your head while your mom was telling her story to capture the intergenerational nuances in your storytelling. So, my question is, what was in your head? What were those monologues and questions? Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of my inner monologue is a lot of respect for my mom and the courage that she had. I didn't view my mom as a courageous person. Throughout my childhood, I always viewed her as like risk averse. So to see that courage in her decision to leave home was something that was new for me. Some of my other inner monologues were about her and my dad's dating period. It's really interesting to hear my mom's perceptions of how men should be.
How should they be? What did she say?
They should always pay for the first date, a lot of traditional Chinese values like prioritizing family. It's really interesting to hear that because I think my generation has a different take, more balanced.
I like to close out the interview by just pondering how important it is for you to look back on the roots of your culture at this early stage of your life. You're 24. So my question is, does looking back hold you back from looking ahead and moving forward in America? And how so?
I think progress is not linear. And I think know history, know thyself. So only by knowing your history and the experiences of those that come before you can better inform and better serve you as you progress forward. Another quote that I really like live by is we stand on the shoulders of giants. So I think it's really important to pay our respects to the people that have paved the way for me to exist right now in the present.
Wow. So those are a motto you go by. And has it been real for you in America?
Yeah, so a lot of my mentors growing up, they are now my colleagues at work in these coalitions I'm part of. And so much of my own learning and like the decisions I make have been influenced by how I perceive them as leaders.
I think your work and your devotion to tracing your roots and uplifting your community and documenting your family history really capture the zeitgeist of our times in America right now, doesn't it? Talk to me more about it.
Yeah, I think it's might be especially more prevalent now with rising US-China tensions and the resurgence of anti-Asian violence. But I would like to underscore that like my documentation and the stuff I'm doing right now is more for myself. I fall into the trap of like doing too much sometimes to like uplift community and doing the work without centering myself and my own needs. Now it's more self-healing journey for my family and for myself.
Thank you, Angela.
I just was stopped in the street. It's been 11 years. And a young woman just stopped me and asked me if I was the tiger mom. I couldn't believe it. I actually said, "You're kidding. You still know what that is?"
That's indeed the tiger mom, Amy Chua. But this time, Amy will talk about her own parents' and grandparents' influence on her, for better and for worse. Tune in to that episode on October 31st, the last Tuesday of the month. One in a Billion Find Your Roots special series is made possible in part by a generous grant from the Phi Lambda Charitable Trust. We also rely on listeners like you to sustain our production. Please consider supporting our work with a donation. To donate, just go to our website at www.oneinaBillionVoices.org. Click Donate. Your donation is tax-deductible. One in a Billion is produced by our sound engineer and designer Brian Latwinowicz, and our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy.